Perfect. Well, hello everyone. Kenneth Martin here from Block Architects and host of the Hard Hat Talks podcast. I'm joined today by Douglas Morrison. Hi Douglas.
How you doing?
Fantastic, thank you. Douglas, do you want to maybe give us, I know you've got a couple of roles that you perform in your career, so maybe want to give us a reintroduction to those roles and let the viewers know a wee bit more about you.
Yeah, certainly. So my day job, I am Deputy Chief Executive Officer with Built Environment Smart Transformation, or BEST for short, and we are Scotland's National Innovation Centre for the built environment. Some of your viewers may know us by our former name, Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, but we've been around for around 12 years, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing up at BEST over the course of the podcast. But also chair of South Lanarkshire College, and that is a role that I've been in for almost 3 years now, and really reflects my passion, commitment for college education and supporting the next generation of workers coming into the industry.
Excellent, fantastic. So, talking about the industry then, so how did you get, two roles obviously, but how did you get involved in those?
Yeah, so bit of a squiggly career. I actually started off in the military, so with the Royal Navy, and when I was coming out, I actually was quite well qualified when I was leaving the Navy, but my qualifications weren't recognised in Scotland. So when I came back home, I was really looking for any employment opportunity. The first one that came along was as an apprentice stonemason, which at the time I had no idea what a stonemason was, what they'd done. But it was an opportunity, and I went with it. So that was my entry into the construction industry. Had a great time as a stonemason, and then moved into the education sector, where I was a stonemasonry architectural conservation lecturer for about 11 years, before taking on a variety of senior roles within education, and then latterly moving over to BEST. So been in and around construction and construction education for about 20 years now.
Excellent. So stonemasonry is something that must be a trade, I think, that a lot of industries just now getting good qualified staff is an issue, but stonemasonry is one that I think is probably up there with the best of them for finding good quality stonemasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's still an area of the industry that I'm really passionate about. I think when you commit like that amount of time in your career to mastering a craft, it stays with you. I've been off the tools many years now, but still deeply connected with many of the businesses, many of the individuals, and actually lovely to see a lot of the apprentices that I taught back in the day now running very successful companies. But as you say, the industry as a whole has a real dearth of stonemasons. I would argue that actually the need for highly qualified, competent stonemasons is higher now than it's been for a very long time. Look at the headlines of fallen masonry and failing facades and gables in particular, and yet we sit at a point where actually stonemasonry training provision in Scotland is now lower than it has ever been. There is now only one college in Scotland that's delivering stonemasonry training. So I would argue it's a national crisis. Clearly there are other bigger topics that that catch the headlines, but our stonemasonry community is at real risk in Scotland right now. Yeah,
I've actually got a personal friend who is now in the police, who might be retiring in the next couple of years, and his hankerings to pick up the chisel again and go back to, I don't know if he'd go back full time, but I think he'd love to just give it a go.
See, I think there's a romanticism with it, this big block of stone, the hammer and the chisel, and I do love the idea, but I think like my body now, I'm not physically strong enough to do that kind of work anymore. But yeah, I mean there is something in getting lost in a piece of stone, working on a piece for weeks on end, and taking that satisfaction and pleasure of creating something that will stand for generations.
Excellent, fantastic. So BEST and obviously the college, in terms of the involvement in the construction industry, the premise of the Hard Hat Talks is really to start talking about the construction industry and to see what challenges those kind of organisations are facing within industry. Do you want to have a wee talk then, or a wee conversation about what you're finding for BEST or the college and how that's affecting the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's been really interesting over the last, say, maybe 3 to 5 years is that there seems to be a growing awareness, from actors outside of the industry. So whether they be, policymakers or investors and entrepreneurs, and the list goes on, around the importance of the built environment. So in my experience, construction industry, quite often maligned, has been something that it's just necessary, create a lot of noise and disruption, but actually has found itself at the forefront of our economic strategy, our industrial strategies, and our environmental, whether it be decarbonisation or kind of broader environmental ambition. So I think there's a growing recognition that the importance of our built environment and the importance of our construction industry is critical to the Scottish economy. And that's really welcome. But what we're not yet seeing is that importance being translated into the investment that we need as an industry to really drive forward and deliver on the ambitions and aspirations that those stakeholders will make. So whether it's more housing or better infrastructure or retrofit of existing assets or decarbonisation of heat and energy, the opportunities for the industry actually are, they're really significant. For me, they're really exciting, but there are real constraints around the capacity of the workforce, the availability of investment, planning and procurement legislation. The list goes on. I'm sure many of your guests have discussed some of these issues in the past, but I think our role at best, really, if I was to kind of condense it down into its simplest form, is to accelerate the built environment's just transition to zero carbon. So we are very environmentally focused, but we're also pragmatic, and we recognise that transition needs to be economically viable, needs to reward well-run businesses, and needs to support well-informed clients. And so to that end, really, our primary focus at best is to support our industry partners and to support those clients and wider stakeholders to deliver better, faster and cheaper outcomes. And we do that through a whole range of different approaches.
Right, yeah. So the whole, I'm not going to call it the green agenda, because I think we're past that now, actually. That was, most of us now accept that there is issues with the environment. Some of us will have different views on how serious it is or isn't, but I think most of us would accept that there is climate change, things are changing, weather's changing, and we need to adapt to that as well. And I think for those of us that get younger families come up behind us, we want to try and do a bit now to make it easier for them in the future. We are seeing a number of clients who are embracing the fact that they need to do, I don't just mean because it's in legislation, but they're embracing things because they're taking it upon themselves to accept that they need to do these things. We're seeing some clients as well who are just don't believe it, which is fair enough. So, and I think those clients are pretty much getting left behind through their own accord. So I guess my question then is, in terms of Best as the organisation and pushing things forward, what is there any specific challenges that Best face specifically in order to try and advance the client journey, the client more aware of what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, again, we work across such a broad spectrum of different stakeholders. So, on the client side, a lot of our work around, encouraging the adoption of, lower carbon materials, systems and solutions, for example. The reality is that cost remains often the primary determinant of adoption. So when we're having conversations with clients, if the green premia that we're applying to certain solutions is cost prohibitive, then the clients are unlikely to adopt it. Even with the best will in the world, if that's what they really wanted to do, it's rare that we work with clients who have access to an unlimited budget. So again, there has to be a pragmatism there in looking at, well, what is actually affordable, and not just in terms of upfront costs, but we can look at life cycle costs and analyse that. But ultimately, our view at Best is that the solutions that we're trying to take forward to promote a transition to a lower carbon built environment have to be economically viable. It's lovely to be evangelical and imagine what great might look like with blank cheques, but that's not the reality that we live in. I think with businesses, actually, I think construction businesses, again, often get quite a hard time in terms of perception on their willingness to innovate, on their willingness to adopt, to respond to digital transformation, for example. Because in our experience, what we see is that construction businesses do tend to adapt to client demand. And actually, if you look at rates of innovation within businesses, the number of innovators that we see at a trade level, at an individual level, constantly solving problems, constantly coming up with new solutions. But ultimately, when it comes to adoption of new materials, new products, new systems, new solutions, quite often the industry appetite is there, but either client demand doesn't line up, or the legislation or regulatory environment doesn't allow, or creates a risk burden that industry are uncomfortable with. So I think if nothing more, what we're trying to do at best is to bring the evidence, is to follow the science, to bring people together to understand challenges, problems, and opportunities, and to move forward not at 100 miles an hour and leave everyone behind, but to move forward at a pace that everyone is comfortable with and that we can collectively buy into.
I think that's one of the things that we're seeing then in the industry just now is in terms of uptake, that there is still some clients who aren't really up for the uptake. It's the kind of smaller builders.
Yep.
No offence to anyone watching, but sometimes it's just trying to get a smaller builder to answer an email, in terms of their appetite for IT. Because at the end of the day, they're not administrators. They would go into the industry to go and build.
Yeah.
So they're on a site, knocking up kits or putting in windows or doing what they're doing. And as architects, they're in the office going, why have you not replied to an email? So there's that kind of issue there as well. But are you finding that the kind of uptake is more on a certain size of contractor or size of organisation then, as opposed to, are we driving this from top down?
Yeah, I think certainly if we take out the two pillars of the environmental transition or decarbonisation of built environment and digital adoption, there are certainly higher levels of uptake within our design and professional services community than there are in our small and micro business operative businesses. And again, that's driven primarily by the benefits of these types of transitions. So when you're talking about take that large scale digital transformation program, where you're running a design firm with loads of liabilities, loads of regulations, potentially hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of staff, you get the economy of scale in terms of the benefit relating to the cost of implementing these types of systems. If you're running a business with 1 to 5 people and you're profitable and you have work for the next 6 to 12 months ahead, the incentive isn't there to make any significant change in the first place. And actually the potential benefit isn't always there because you don't have the economy of scale to realise the benefit. So I think when we talk about digital transformation or we talk about decarbonisation, we're talking about very different things for very different types, sizes, sectors and subsectors of businesses. And I do think that one of the issues that's really unhelpful, particularly in the media, is that we tend to view these types of issues, these types of transformations through a singular lens, at times to quite a binary or polarised view, but actually it's much more nuanced, it's much more complex, and ultimately it's about meeting people where they're at, understanding the objectives they're looking to achieve, and not taking a one-size-fits-all approach, but recognising that through a process of iterative improvement there's something there for everyone.
Yeah. Well, procuring any building or project nowadays is a complex process, and sustainability and innovation and construction, all of that stuff that goes towards the sustainability is actually just a significant but a small part in the whole process. And we're starting to see some innovative materials. I say we're starting to see, to some extent, for many years, architects have always been suckers for here's a new flashy material and away we go. Certainly in the back of that Grenfell has made us rethink about, I suppose, trusting some of the information we're given from a lot of manufacturers. Does it really do this? Does it really do that? To some extent, we're going back to, a brick never lies. Why don't we start pulling out bricks again? Is that a kind of ethos in that as well, maybe? But I think as we start to go forward, it's definitely about making more educated decisions, not just for the client, but also for us as designers. And I don't just mean architects; I mean mechanical, structural, everything. We need to make much more informed decisions about the materials we're selecting, and not just for environmental purposes, but also for fire and acoustics and all other things that go with it. We had, I'm sure it was Mike from Nordan in the podcast. Yeah. Mike was telling us that there's something like I'm sure it was specifically with Nordan, you can specify up to 4,000 different types or specifications of glass. Now, when you think about that level of choice across the whole industry, where it's brick, concrete, steel, different types, you go, what chance do us as designers actually have when there's no way we could know everything about everything, So we do start to think about specialising or pigeonholing our designs, or this is our thing, this is how we do it. Whether that's right or wrong for the client at the end of the day might not be, but it's I think the choice potentially is something that's maybe too big for the industry.
I would agree entirely, and I think it goes beyond choice of individual products and components as well, because there's the natural question as to how these products and components interact with one another, and that adds whole other layers of complexity. At best we are. Interestingly, what we're finding is that many of the innovations that we are championing, we of course have novel materials and products through development, and that's a really important part of the mix. So whether that's a recycled brick, for example, or whether it's some of the more novel natural insulation materials that our industry partners are developing, there's an almost endless number of interesting things coming to the market, all cost prohibitive at this stage, again because they don't have economy of scale at this point, but novel, useful, interesting ideas that may well scale in the future. But actually where a lot of our work is being focused is looking back towards the natural materials that did make up our built environment for hundreds of years. So stone, another great example, is a stonemason. Looking at stone, looking at timber, looking at a broader range of natural, sustainable products, but reimagine them for a more industrialised world. So again, for stonemasonry, it's hugely labour intensive, very high cost burden. Are there ways that we can bring that down through automation, for example? Looking at timber, are there ways we can engineer timber using Scottish homegrown materials to create mass timber solutions that, again, we can have confidence in because they have been used for a very long time. And I think just getting that balance between the next new novel thing that might be the solution that we need, but not losing sight of the solutions that we've had, that through the integration of different technologies, systems and processes, we can bring back into a position of cost viability, with the confidence that comes from a historical track record of performing really well in our built environment.
I think the whole cost profile of a project, the lifetime cycle value of a project, which is one of the things you mentioned earlier, they're probably factors in the decision making for quite a lot of kind of corporate or government level types of contracts. I wonder just how much this kind of smaller developer cares about some of that stuff. But I've chatted about that. So I think then, with that in mind, obviously best, I don't know. We've been up to the I'm going to say showroom. It's much more than a showroom. We've been up to the factory floor, seen some of the products. Some of the guys have done some of the training. It's quite a sophisticated setup. How do you portray that though to potentially the clients? How do the clients engage with that in terms of there's a potential solution to the problem? How do they get to know about it?
So I think our team certainly do a great job on socials to raise awareness. I will say from the outset that it's very rare for Best to do anything on our own. So generally, most of the significant majority of the projects and programs that we're involved in are in partnership with industry partners. So we are, we're driven by industry demand. We're demand led in that respect. And so, we will have industry partners of all shapes and sizes come to us and say, we've got this problem, or, we've thought about this potential solution. Can you help us? And generally that, that leads to, there's always a bit of sifting in the early stage to understand whether there are others already doing it, whether it's been tried before, and if so, what were the results. But when we get to the point where an idea becomes a tangible project, our team really kick in and make sure that there's maximum visibility on what we're doing, a real open door policy to anyone that wants to come along and collaborate and learn and support. And so it's it's quite an organic process. We're really keen to engage with any industry stakeholder that has a problem or a potential solution. And our offer to the industry, again, isn't one size fits all. It's a very tailored offering, but our primary concern is to take these amazing solutions and support them to scale into the mainstream. So, to that end, we're really keen to welcome people to our campus, whether that be to look at some of the demonstrator units, to engage in training, or to drive forward their own projects. The appetite for that's really high on our side.
Excellent. So you mentioned housing earlier, and it's just it's coming into my head as we're talking there. We've mentioned housing. We know there's a housing crisis in Scotland and the UK. We mentioned some of the projects, innovative solutions that Best are working with their partners on. As architects, we're challenged just now with housing, whereby most planning departments, most planning authorities have I'm going to say an ideal wish list about how housing should go forward, which in my mind doesn't necessarily respond to the fact that we've got various levels of housing needs. We've got everything from how do we resolve the homelessness, to how do we provide more one-bedroom student apartments, to go through people living in flats before they can then afford to move on to their first home, front gardens, back gardens. We've got planned apartments now who would prefer to see a lot of the car parking and gardens at the back with footpaths right up to your front window, so no, what we would call as architects, no defensible space. So there's lots changing in the housing industry with so many people with influences on it. But if we take it back to maybe, I'm going to throw a project idea at you just to see, just for the sake of it. If there was somebody out there who said, for example, we think we've got an interesting solution that could help the homelessness people in Glasgow, by producing alongside yourself some kind of waterproof, thermally okay cabin that we can put 20 of them on a street corner in Glasgow, so to speak. Is that the type of projects that you could get involved in as well? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lovely example to pick on, because we actually have a project just like that on the go.
Oh, somebody beats to it.
Yeah. So I mean, beat you to it, and I think this is back to the earlier point, is that there is no single solution. We are, and I'm sure they won't mind being named on the podcast, but we're working with Social Bite and Ecosystems Technologies to deliver 20-ish unit homeless centres, one in Dundee, one in South Lanarkshire. And they are modular units made from cross-laminated, glue-laminated timbers. They're absolutely gorgeous. If any of your listeners want to come up and visit the campus, we have one on site to come and see. But they are at the upper end of the kind of cost profile, and whilst they're a solution for those particular partners, it's really upsetting actually to see the homeless stats across Scotland, particularly in Glasgow, rise at the pace that they're rising. And so whilst these kind of cabin-like, and they are like holiday cabins, cabin-like solutions come to the market, relatively high cost in real terms. They are part of the mix, but we do need lower cost, scalable we would argue modular is a good route to go down because
Yeah.
you get the efficiencies through repetition of the manufacturing process. But again, there would be a real call and ask from my perspective that if you are working in the industry and you see a way to deliver solutions for homeless that are better, faster and cheaper than current solutions, then we'd be really keen to work with you and support you on that.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I think that's just part and parcel of where we're at just now in the cycle of life, I suppose, and buildings and solutions. And
Yeah.
we need to start thinking about these things. I mean, but I've mentioned this in the podcast before. We're in a building just now, which is an office building that's used, but just round the corner from us and round the corner from yourselves, there's several office buildings sitting empty,
Vacant, yeah.
and they've been there for,
Yeah.
I'm going to say 20 years maybe.
Yeah.
Sat vacant for 20 years, and arguably they're buildings that could readily be changed into some form of housing, not long-term housing, but a stopgap solution. But I just wonder, in England, for example, I know that there is permitted development to do changes of use on office developments like that, and pretty widely accepted. I guess as architects and designers in Scotland, you'd be thinking, well, it's still an industrial area and you can't put people in an industrial area. But actually, in my mind, if it's not a long-term solution, then it's something that should be investigated.
I would agree, and I think on the broader housing agenda, I welcome the increased attention that's coming, from government through agencies, through the business community and elsewhere, and it is noisy just now. So there's almost not a week that goes by without another report being published. And we've been involved in a number of the reports, so I say that without judgment. But it feels as though we've explored the issues, we understand where many of the constraints sit, and whether that's in the social affordable housing space or the build to rent space. But the homeless space, I think in particular, is one of those areas where we really shouldn't be waiting on the perfect solution. If the choice is between a converted industrial unit, it doesn't have to be cheap, it doesn't have to be low quality. But if the choice is between a converted industrial unit and another night on the street, then I don't think that's a choice at all. So there's a pragmatism that needs to emerge, but most importantly of all, there's leadership, there's coordination, there's clarity around, particularly at local authority level, what sites can be available and what support the local authority can provide. And of course that's something that we've learned in our experience with Social Bite and ecosystems with their homeless villages, that it's a lot more than just providing a unit or a space. It's the wraparound support that many of the homeless community also need in order for that space to really work for them and to support them to transition from those meanwhile solutions into more permanent accommodation. So it's a complex issue, but again, I think what the construction industry can do is bring forward, preferably low cost, scalable, high quality solutions, so that when local authorities and agencies and third sector organisations are making investments and making decisions, that they themselves have clarity over what the art of the possible looks like.
Yeah. Well, I do think that would start a chain motion, if you like, in terms of helping to unlock other areas of the housing chain, and I keep thinking back to, I'm going to say, when was it? 15 or so years ago, let me think. Pre the recession, pre-2007, 2009, the number of flats we used to see getting built was extraordinary. And then interest rates dropped, and then all of a sudden it was affordable for a first-time home buyer to get straight into I'm going to say, £160,000 3-bedroom house because it was affordable. Probably now we can see that it's not quite so affordable. So maybe we'll start to see more flats getting built, etc. Not that sure. I'm not that sure. I think that local authorities welcome flats. I think they prefer housing. But again, it's that we need to fill the gaps all the way through the chain.
100%.
We need the people who've got the 4-bedroom house to get to £500,000-600,000 mansion because they feel that's the next step for them, to leave the 4-bedroom house for the family members. That, and it's just that whole chain, till eventually we all end up in, I don't mean this negatively, but we end up in the care home situation.
Yeah.
Quality care homes. So there's a whole life cycle of properties, I think, that we need to get involved in.
I think so. I mean, we are working with some really interesting developers, and a term that's been emerging even just over the last few months more regularly has been this notion of gentle density.
All right, not heard that one. That's interesting.
So and it's the notion. I mean, Scotland, Glasgow, in particular, albeit across all cities, has a rich tradition of tenements and flatted developments. So at a city level, we understand they're not high rise, but there's a density to them, and that drives an affordability and it drives community, which has really underpinned our culture for many years. And where we do look towards new developments, there has been a light resistance to flatted developments perhaps over the last few years, but actually when you take a scheme size development and you're looking at mixed use, then there's absolutely the space for your 2, 3, 4 bedroom homes, and there's the space for flats, kind of 3, 4, 5 stories high, but also the adoption of like townhouses as an example, whereby you have an increase in density insofar as you're able to cover the floor plan on a smaller footprint and therefore build more units in. But you're able to kind of find the balance between that. Everyone has a 4-bedroom house with a big garden and 3-car driveway, and the tenement, it kind of sits in between. And this notion of delivering a gentle density, which enables higher density, higher population within new developments, but which also drives the cost viability for developers to be able to deliver these schemes at a lower cost, at a higher quality, and ultimately at better value for the homeowners or those who are renting the assets. I think is kind of the way to go.
Yeah, I think it leads to a better environment as well. I mean, if we can increase the density in some respects, we could also potentially clear up some more space for green space and outdoor spaces. So that all becomes important. And also thinking more about the integration of businesses within housing estates. I mean, you can drive not far from here. There's houses. Well, I live in it. There's over 1,000 houses. And there's a shop at the bottom and nothing else for 2 swing parts, and you think, well, there's bits of land you think, maybe on a Friday night I'd quite like to nip down to the bar and get a pint with my neighbours, and we've got a place in Spain, and in every corner there's a pub or a restaurant or a something that's always well used and well attended. You think, we've got a real social culture going on there, and we tend to just build houses, and then we can't put anything in amongst them because that's. And we know why, because for years and years the planners didn't want the chap on the door saying so-and-so's making noise and playing music at night, But actually I think there's an element of, we just need to live with that. We just need to accept it.
I would agree entirely. I would go as far as to say that, in more recent years I believe we've designed out community from our schemes and developments, and if we're looking to build communities and we're looking to do genuine placemaking, Scotland has known how to do placemaking very well for a very long time. The last couple of decades we have lost sight of that, and it's very basic, as you say. It's about shops, it's about services, it's about shared spaces, it's about green spaces. It doesn't need to be expensive, it doesn't need to be complicated. Do see lots of developments coming forward with great ideas. Shared EV clubs certainly are becoming more popular. A whole range of kind of district community heating schemes are coming forward. So these are welcome. We'll see how they integrate. But those core services of a place to buy food, a place to eat, a place to spend time with neighbours and communities, I believe we have a duty to ensure that these places are core to to our planning system, and our requirement going forward, because again, we have seen some pretty high profile schemes in Scotland, even just over the last 2-3 years, where your developer commitments around shared spaces and services haven't actually been delivered, or have been delayed indefinitely, and that's just not good enough. We need to ensure there's good placemaking in at the planning stage, and we need to ensure that aspiration, those commitments, are delivered on.
Delivered. Yeah. So delivery is a big thing in Scotland, as you know,
Yeah.
just now, and we kind of touched on it before we started recording. One of the questions that the last guest left for you was, how would you resolve the recruitment issues in the industry? And I know that's big in your agenda. So I was supposed to ask you that question then. I thought we'd just chat about it.
Yeah, sure.
And that might bring in, to some extent, your role at the college as well. So what are we doing? How can we fix it? What's the college up to? What's best up to?
So, I mean, I think what I would say from the outset is that the notion that we're going to resolve the workforce issue through increasing headcount is misplaced. There just aren't enough people either being born or migrating in for us to exponentially increase the current size of the workforce. And of course, there's a significant drop off expected over the next 10 to 15 years, with kind of older workers dropping out of the industry. So there is a skills crisis in construction, and what I would say is that, as a ray of hope, there is not a lack of people looking to get into the industry, despite what many headlines would have you believe. Colleges, for example, quite often their most oversubscribed courses sit in the construction area, and we have a huge amount of, it's not a term I like to use, but I think just to conceptualise it, we have a huge amount of wastage in the system in that respect, with lots of young people going into construction related college programmes, but then not necessarily translating that training into jobs, whether it's an apprenticeship or otherwise. So we have a talent pool. Now, admittedly, that talent pool is predominantly young white male from low kind of areas of multiple deprivation, low socioeconomic status. So there's a diversity issue for sure, but there's loads of young people wanting to go into construction programmes. So it becomes a question of how do we translate that into what we actually need, and how do we ensure that those young people, and potentially people who are looking to come into the industry from other sectors, have a very clear pathway to employment. And I think that's where there are significant improvements that we can make. There's certainly ways that we can evolve the approach to apprenticeships to ensure that prior learning that young people accumulate in colleges is recognised. So instead of the proposition to an employer just now in Scotland for a construction apprenticeship is essentially, you take on a young person, and for around 20 weeks of that first year they're going to be at a college. So particularly if you're a smaller micro business, losing an employee for 20 weeks, even if they have low levels of experience, that's not easy to take. So I think we can do some front loading of the training piece in colleges to make sure that employers are getting work ready graduates and apprentices from day one. And I think the industry as a whole needs to be more willing to adapt to a lifelong learning model. So this notion that you must do, whether it's 4 years or 3 years or 2 years, whatever the duration is, before you can be recognised as competent, again is misplaced. So I think that recognising that you can bring people to a level of competence at a task level and get them to do things, and you can continue to build that competence over the years. But ultimately, where the key challenge sits is that the uncomfortable truth is that our curriculum in colleges isn't necessarily aligned to what industry and society actually need.
Right.
So the example that I would offer there, talking about the housing crisis. Housing crisis hasn't taken us by surprise. We've been able to track it for early 90s, if not a little bit later. And yet there's still not a college in Scotland where you can learn how to build a house. There is no house building course. Um, passive house is an area that you're really interested in. At best, we're doing a lot of training around passive house. You can't learn passive house principles or standards in any college in Scotland. And the list kind of goes on. And ultimately for me, I think what the system can do, what the education system can do, is step away from quite a rigid focus on these are the courses we do, these are the occupations that we deliver, these are the time frames that we deliver them in, these are the days, and everything else, and move towards more of a mission-based approach, which is we recognise there's a huge opportunity around housing, so we're going to support the industry to train individuals who are competent in the tasks that are required to deliver housing. Same for retrofit, same for passive house at a much lower scale, and the list kind of goes on. So I think that's a big transition that needs to happen in order to ensure that the people that are coming out the system have the broader range of skills that we need to carry out the tasks that that ultimately we're looking to deliver on.
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the sites I've been on recently where there's a lot of the tradespersons who are time served,
Yeah.
one would argue, very experienced, but not keeping up to date with,
Yeah,
so it's like the first thing, they see a set of drawings and go, I'm not going to do it that way, I'm going to do it the way I've always done
yeah,
it. But the reason why it's been changed on the drawings is because we're trying to do something different to comply with a regulation or a policy or a client demand or
Yeah.
something. So I kind of think, if we could somehow engage the existing workforce to get into the culture of CPD, continual professional development.
Yeah.
They are professional electricians, builders, joiners, whatever. I don't. If they see themselves as tradespeople, then fair enough. But they're professionals in their own trade. So if we could somehow encourage them to get involved in CPD every year, how they do it, I don't know. As architects, we've got to do. I'm going to say 30 hours. Keep me holding that actually. I keep a track of it on my tracker, but 30 hours CPD every year.
yeah,
That's recorded, and our professional bodies can ask to see copies of that. When you renew every year as your profession every year. So it would be nice to know actually that when you're going on site, speaking to these professional trades people, that actually they do have an interest in going and learning. That if they're fitting boilers or whatever. No, we've done that, and we know why you're doing that, Kenny. And more often than not, we find that's not. I mean, sometimes there is people out there who do it, but it's not mandatory for some of these tradespeople, and that becomes a bit exhausting at times. When we feel as if you're the Grim Reaper sometimes on site. Try to tell people why things are now being done the way they are.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think this is it. The heart of this is the issue around competence, right? So that's why I'm really arguing for this kind of conceptual transition away from occupations towards conceptualisation of a competency profile for the workforce, right? So essentially, it's about having the right people in the right place, with the right tools and equipment, and able to do things to the right standard. So, I think the competency agenda that's been driven at a UK level post Grenfell has the potential to be incredibly helpful, because we see where it fails. I mean, Grenfell is a horrific example of where the misalignment between design, supply chain, installer base, etc. Can result in a real tragedy. But even just last week, looking at UK government's own critique of the Green Homes scheme, where 98% of external wall insulation interventions have failed or need some form of further intervention. That's just not good enough, and that's an investment from the public purse into very well intended interventions to transition towards this lower carbon built environment. I think whilst businesses absolutely have a responsibility to invest in their employees, and ensure that their workers are trained and competent, I also think that government and their agencies have a responsibility to ensure that where there are significant shifts in standards and regulations, that there is a resultant investment in the skill system to ensure that there's provision for that, for that transition to take place. We see it in pockets. It's not that it hasn't happened before, but I generally find that there's a disconnect between both economic and environmental policy objectives and then the educational policy. It's very rarely aligned, and it's very rarely invested in. And I think that's part of the reason why colleges at times struggle to respond flexibly and with agility to the next big thing. And I think it's a big part of the reason why businesses, I do speak to a lot of business owners and leaders, and they're jaded, with the number of new big things that come over the horizon and the new policies that are going to change everything, and when they don't always play out as expected, it just chips away and undermines confidence and willingness to invest. I mean, the worst thing that a smaller micro business owner can do is invest heavily in their staff to create competitive advantage based on policy or legislation shift, and then to see that policy or legislation being pulled, and they're left often thousands of pounds out of pocket and no work ahead of them.
Yeah, well, as a small business owner, we've been through that, and I think you're right. As a small business owner, the time you get through the whole finding the work, doing the work, chasing the payments, chatting to accountants, the day-to-day grind of running a business, someone coming, over the horizon saying this is the next due thing, you go, hard enough just to get through yesterday, never mind thinking about what's coming down the line, And I kind of see that with the whole EV, electrical vehicle thing. We see planning departments forcing us down the routes with modern housing, putting EV points, and we think, is this? I mean, okay, but how do we know EV is actually truly going to be the next big thing? Because I think by the time we've got a much more energy efficient fleet of cars on the road, not all of them are going to be EV. It's almost like the Betamax VHS thing, where everybody was buying Betamax because it was the first one out the trap, and then all of a sudden it didn't exist and VHS was the way to go. And I kind of feel the same, I think, with some EV cars. Hybrids are probably maybe becoming a bit more popular as well because of the increased mileage, but batteries are changing, and then we've got the whole hydrogen fuel thing. You go, okay, but still we've been driven to spend thousands, if not tens of thousands of pounds on a development to put in EV charging points,
Yeah, and look, I mean, there's a wonderful book that Hannah Ritchie has just published, her second book, I think, that I'd highly recommend. It's 50 questions relating to these types of issues. Very science-based, very balanced view. But I'd strongly encourage your listeners to have a read. But I think the core message that runs through that book, the core belief that I share, is that any investment at a national scale in a singular solution is incredibly high risk, and the reality is that our future transitions, whatever outcomes and objectives we're looking to achieve, will be delivered through very blended models. And the challenge we have now, take it all the way back to our tenement chat from earlier, we're delivering built environment solutions, whether they be homes or large scale infrastructure, that are expected to perform and adapt over generations. So to go down the road of any individual technology exclusively, through regulation and legislation, I think is misplaced. But we also need to give signals to the market as to, from a policy perspective, where we want to make those bets. And so I think that it requires maturity at a policymaker level. It requires a lot of intelligence and insight and expertise, but ultimately, for me, it requires that balanced view and a recognition that the solution is, as you say, EVs undoubtedly will be and look to be quite a significant part of the solution. But other options are available and are emerging and will continue to emerge. So yeah, I'm pretty agnostic on what technologies we use, but to take it back to those core principles, my interest is to accelerate the built environment's just transition to net zero, and I'm really passionate about exploring any solutions that deliver better, faster and cheaper outcomes for our citizens.
Yeah, excellent. So just before we round up then, is there anything left in the best table or the college table that you particularly want to chat about?
Oh goodness, I mean, there are, for me, it feels like the most interesting time in my career from a built environment perspective, and it's because I think built environment is getting the attention that it deserves. That's not always a good thing,
right?
Yeah. So, I would make a call, a plea to balance good regulation with a recognition of our need to move at pace and at scale. I think there's a real risk that we smother progress through overly burdensome regulation, or certainly conflicting regulation, which we see. And I think from an education and skills perspective, I think that with the reform agenda that's taken place in the policy world in Scotland, there is a generational opportunity for us to redefine how construction education is structured and delivered, both for new entrants and for existing operatives and professionals. And so to that end, a dual call to your listeners to get involved in shaping regulation, future legislation through consultations. Come along to BEST and speak with us, and engage with your professional bodies. Make sure your views are being heard, because our government need that, our policymakers need to hear those views. And similarly, engage with your local college. You'll work collaboratively with your competitors, as uncomfortable as that may be at times, to articulate very clearly what your demand for skills is likely to look like, the pipeline you're looking to create, but recognise your influence and the potential that you have as business owners, as industry practitioners, to take advantage of this generational shift and deliver a skill system that really delivers for construction in the future.
Excellent, fantastic. Thank you for that. We've covered the question that obviously the last guest had left for yourself. You've probably picked up on the fact earlier that the next podcast is actually going to be me just rounding things off for the year, which will be going out in December. So with that in mind, do you have a question you'd like to ask me that we can try and answer in the next podcast?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think to stay on the topic of regulation, right. So if you can change one regulation relating to the built environment in Scotland in 2026, what would it be, and why?
Oh, excellent. I've got a couple of weeks to think about an answer for that one, so fantastic. Douglas, thanks for coming on. I very much appreciate it. I'm sure the listeners will have great room and avenue and scope for thought and some provoking, some interesting responses to some of the probably questions that you've raised, because I could probably chat to you for a good few hours picking away at things, which isn't the point of the podcast, but I'm sure the listeners will be mulling that over. If they want to get in contact with you, how's best to do that?
Yeah, sure. So my details are on the BEST website.
Right.
You can get in touch through there or catch me on LinkedIn.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Hard Hat Talks. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. That way, you'll be sure to never miss an episode. If you've got any feedback or a topic you want us to tackle, please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your hard hat on.